Well, hey there, and welcome to the Pursuit of Love podcast. I'm Mark Etchison, and I'm so grateful that you've joined us today. Here at Pursuit of Love, it's our purpose to help you live each day of your life as a disciple of Jesus Christ, learning from Him how to live moment by moment in God's presence and in His power and in His love. So today, you guys have seen that the last few weeks during the series, this is the pulpit that I preach from. This is where I preach on Sunday mornings, and I'm using the messages from Sunday mornings for our podcast. But this week, it's looking like we're having some inclement weather coming in. And if you're in our area, we're looking at 5 to 8 inches of snow, maybe with some ice or sleet mixed in with that. I'm recording this Friday morning, so at the moment, I don't know if that has come through or not. But because of that, we're doing things a little bit differently. So I'm recording everything from here. I pre-recorded the message for the church in here. So I'm just doing everything from right here. So we're so grateful that you've joined us. I did say that we were going to do Taking Our Place in God's Story coming up on this week of the podcast. But I'm actually, I wanted to do a little bit more. I wanted to extend the story out. I didn't really conclude it well with the teaching that I had done last week. That was intentional, but I decided that I wanted to go back and read a little bit from Revelations and from Isaiah and talk about the conclusion of the story, because the story needs a conclusion. And before we start digging into our place, I thought I'd try to give us a vision of where we're headed with this. So this week's message is it's just on the resurrection, what the resurrection of Jesus means and what it means for us, and what our resurrection is going to look like when God brings the world back to the way it was meant to be. So I hope it blesses you. So we are here in the midst of our Tree of Life teaching. We've been telling the story of redemption. Today we're going to look at the conclusion of that story. Every good story has to have an end, and truth be told, we like happy endings, don't we? At least starting in the 20th century, fairy tales have this phrase. Most of them have this phrase at the end of it, and I bet you guys know it before I say it. And they lived happily ever after. It's kind of cheesy, but it's what we want. We talk about people finding their happy ever after. And we want things to conclude well. My wife, when she watches a movie or when the kids come to her and they're like, "Hey, Mom, let's watch this movie," she says, "How does it end?" Because she can endure almost anything as long as it ends well. It can't end with despair. It has to end with hope. And there's something in us, obviously, that drives us toward that. But recently my kids and I, we and Amy, we went and watched Spider-Man: No Way Home. And I'm not going to spoil the movie for you if you haven't seen it yet. But I will give you a few details that you can see in the trailer. The story is, at the end of the last Spider-Man, Mysterio, Spider-Man's bad guy, had revealed to the whole world that Spider-Man was Peter Parker. And so now everybody knows who he is. His identity is given to everybody, and it's ruining his life. So he goes to his friend Dr. Strange, who's a sorcerer, and Dr. Strange he wants Dr. Strange to cast a spell that will make the whole world forget that he exists. And so he does, but in the midst of it, Peter starts having second thoughts. He says, "Well, what about this person? What about this person?" And the spell turns into chaos, and lots of suffering, lots of tough stuff happens because of that. And but we all love the movie. It did have a great ending, but I'm not going to spoil that for you at all. It just was a good movie. And a couple days later, one of our kids sent to our family group text a meme that they saw where Spider-Man goes to Doctor Strange, and instead of having him making the world forget who he was, he just tells the world to forget who Mysterio was, which would actually exactly solve the problem that he wanted solved without the ensuing chaos. And I was like, wow, man, why didn't he do that? But then immediately I thought, well, because that wouldn't have been a movie worth watching. I wouldn't have wanted to go see that. He starts out with a little bit of trouble. He goes to Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange fixes it up, and everything's good. And there's no suffering. There's no struggles. There's no hardship. Everything's good. And I thought, no, that's not a movie I'd want to watch. And so we do want a happy ending, but there's something to be said about the struggle in the middle. And I don't want to make light of that, because this is a movie. You know, these are not real people. These are actors playing these roles. And so their suffering's not real, but your suffering is. My suffering is. And the suffering both that we experience both on an individual level and on a global level is real. And the suffering, not just currently, but all throughout human history, it's all very real, and it's all very tragic. And so I don't want to make light of that. But you see, we have two options when it comes to our view of evil. We can allow our view of evil to determine our view of God, or we can allow our view of God to determine our view of evil. If you allow evil to determine your view of God, you're very likely going to think, well, there's not much to this God. One of the famous arguments against God is that if he was all good and if he was all powerful, then there would be no suffering. There is suffering, so either there is no God, or he's either not all good, or he's either not all powerful, or both. But we Christians believe that God is all good, that God is light, and in him there's no darkness. And we believe that he is all powerful, that nothing is impossible with God. So how does that match up with, well, if he was, then there wouldn't be any suffering? Well, you have to rethink your idea of what good is. Is good the fact that everybody always gets what they want and everything goes their way? Well, I don't think that's true. In fact, I think that is most of our ideas of what's good, because when we envision heaven, we might think of heaven in terms of everything will go our way. Like, if you like the temperature is 65 degrees and I like it 68, then it'll feel like 68 to me, it'll feel like 65 to you. I've actually heard people say that. I've thought that myself. But is that really good, just that everybody gets what they want? Is it really good that there's no possibility of suffering? What if there are some goods that can only exist with at least the possibility of suffering? Now, I believe that's the case. I mean, think about romantic love. We all believe that romantic love, or not, maybe not everybody. If you've just been burned in a relationship, you may not think so, but most people believe that romantic love is a good thing. But romantic love requires that it be given and received by two people freely, which means that it's possible that I could have romantic love for somebody that doesn't return it, or you could have romantic love for somebody that doesn't return it. And if somebody has romantic love for someone and they feel romantically towards somebody else, that person's going to suffer. The first person is going to suffer because they're denied something that they deeply want. So you can fix that a couple of ways. One, God could make everybody only feel that way towards one other person and make sure they all match up. But that's just a fancy way to arrange marriages, and most people don't believe that arranged marriages are a good thing. Or he could just say, no, we're not going to do the romantic love thing because too many people could get hurt if we did that. And he would deny humanity one of its great goods. Now, see, I see that. I believe that's the same way with all the good that God has in store for us. And we don't even know what all that is. And that's a part of the problem when we look at evil. God doesn't always take the time to explain everything to us, how it's going to work out at the end. I love a line in Rich Mullins' song. He says, even if you could explain it to me, it would still hurt. And so that's not what God is getting at here. But if we turn around and we let our view of God determine our view of evil, then that shifts things. See, the scriptures talk about that. Paul says, this light and momentary affliction is not worth comparing the glory that's to be revealed in us and to us. And don't think that's just some flippant thing that some cozy preacher said that had everything going his way. Paul lived a very difficult life. Specifically because of the good news, the gospel that he preached about God. He suffered in all kinds of ways. But he called it light and momentary because he had a vision of God that allowed him to see that all is going to be okay in the long run. Not just okay, but glorious. That the suffering isn't worth comparing to the goodness. That evil as big as it seems, when it's put in the context of the glory of God, then we see that evil will have its moment, but it won't last. And the redemption will be so far beyond that we will look back at the evil and say, that was worth it for this. Another way Paul says it, he says, eye has not seen and ear has not heard what God has in store for those who love him. But he has revealed it to us by his Spirit. I don't think that means that that God has revealed to us the exact details of what that's going to look like. He's given us some images of it, and I've got my Bible here. We're going to look at some of those images momentarily. But I don't think that's what that means. I don't think it means that that we've got an exact blueprint of what that looks like. But to say that he's revealed it to us by a Spirit, God's Spirit is love. God's Spirit is beauty and goodness and power and glory. I think it means that what God has given us, he hasn't given us the blueprint. He hasn't given us everything that we need to understand suffering and evil in the world. But what he has given us is he's given us his heart. He's allowed us, if anybody wants to see God, they can. And they can see God in all of his glory and all of his goodness. And that will be enough for them to say, man, what God has in store. If a God that good would allow this kind of suffering, what in the world glory does he have in store that'll make this okay? See, that's what it means for God to have revealed it to us by his Spirit. That God has given us enough light about him, particularly through Jesus and through his willing to do the suffering along with us. God has revealed to us that there is a glorious destiny that the suffering in this world can't be compared to. One of my favorite stories in Christian history is the story of Julian of Norwich. And I may not have all the details right, but she was dying, I believe. And she lived during the Black Plague, and I think she was dying with it. And on her deathbed, she had these revelations of Jesus, and then she ends up being healed. But there's this famous saying that when she came out of that, she said, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. The revelation of Jesus let her know that, and she said, the reason Jesus revealed that to her is because she was wondering, Lord, why didn't you just prevent sin? Why didn't you just prevent suffering? Because there is a greater good that had to allow the possibility for sin and suffering. But God is so big and so good that greater good will be achieved. That sin will not win, but that God will have the final victory. Another thing that really helped me with this is one time Dallas Willard and John Ortberg were having a conversation. It was actually, Dallas was suffering. He was suffering with cancer. His body was weak. The cancer would not long after that take his life. And he's sitting there with John Ortberg, and John Ortberg's calling out some words and letting Dallas talk about them. And John Ortberg calls out the word joy. And Dallas defines it as a pervasive sense of well-being. And John looked at Dallas and he said, does that mean I'm okay? And Dallas looked back at him, body wrecked with cancer, weak, but with tears in his eyes, he said, everything is okay. See, that is the vision that we carry in a world in which, from all appearances, everything is not okay. But it has to be the vision of the goodness and the glory of God. And God shows that glory to us in Jesus through his coming, his life, as we've talked about, and his death on our behalf. God shows his love for us in this, that while we were sinners, Christ died. If God was willing to let Jesus go through that, there must be something big on the other side. And in fact, the writer of the Hebrews says, for the joy set before him, Jesus endured the cross, despising the shame. And Jesus went through a lot, but we all know that on the other side was resurrection. That Jesus was resurrected. And that resurrection, what that means, what that shows us is that evil will have its day, but goodness, love, glory, it'll triumph in the end. And that's what the resurrection is about. See, it's what we see in Jesus. Specifically, we see this body that he took on. He didn't just stand afar off and redeem us, but he got right in the middle of it. And he took on this dust, this flesh that, we were created out of. And that's very important to understand. John went so far as to say that anybody that says that Jesus didn't come in the flesh, he's Antichrist. And the reason that's so important is because we have to remember that it is this world that God is redeeming. When Jesus was raised from the dead, it was this earth that was raised from the dead. His spirit immediately went to be with God. He told the thief on the cross, today you'll be with me in paradise. So there was something else that happened. It wasn't just that Jesus was taken to heaven when he was resurrected, but something significant was happening with the world that God created. And Jesus' body, that body that had suffered, was now shot through with the presence of God in such a way that it was impervious to suffering. That body that had experienced isolation when it was on the cross, so much so that Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" was now so filled, literally filled with God's presence that it would never experience loneliness again. That body that was rejected by everyone, was blasphemed and his name dragged through the mud. Now at that name, every knee should bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. And that body that had experienced death was now filled with the very essence of life from head to toe. That's what the resurrection is. N.T. Wright says it this way, that the resurrected body of Jesus is one small but very significant corner of creation, of flesh, of dust, of earth that has been redeemed by the presence of God. See, the whole earth is meant to be like that. But because we had said to God, no thanks, we want to do things our own way, God had to hide. And his presence is no longer manifest in creation the way it was meant to be. Now, we can't go through it, but if you want to understand how that works and the effects of it, read through Romans chapter 8. Paul lays that out for us. But see, there's coming a day when that's not going to be the case. And the resurrection is the first fruits of that, Paul says. But there's coming a day when all of creation, the trees, the oceans, everything's going to be so shot through with the presence of God in our own bodies as well. We'll have glorified bodies, which means our bodies will be filled with the presence of God. And that's why in Revelations it says, let me find my spot, Revelation 21:22. "And I saw no temple in the city, for his temple is the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb." The temple is the place where the presence of God could be mediated so that those who wanted to see his presence could, and those who didn't could just stay away. "And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives its light, and its lamp is the Lamb of God. By its light will the nations walk, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it, and its gates will never be shut by day, and there will be no night." There's no night because, whether the sun's up or whether the sun's down, it doesn't matter, because the glory of God is shining through every aspect of creation. And when that happens, there is no pain, there is no loneliness, there is no rejection, there is no death. Just like Jesus in his resurrection body will never experience those again, all of creation, it'll all be through, because the presence of God will come pouring through and light up the whole world. Another one of my favorite images of this is over in Isaiah chapter 11. Starting in verse 6, it says, "The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat. And the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den." Now see, those are frightening images in this world. The nursing child playing over the hole of the cobra. Well, see, why would the cobra strike the child? Because it's afraid. Why would the wolf eat the lamb? Because it's hungry. It's experiencing deprivation. So how do we stop that? How are we going to have a world in which those things are safe? Well, you have to get rid of hunger. You have to get rid of deprivation. You have to get rid of fear. How do you do that? Well, the next line. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Now see, Isaiah 6 has already said that the whole earth is full of God's glory, but it's not full of the knowledge of God's glory. But in that day, in the conclusion, in the final conclusion, when Jesus comes back to the earth and he establishes his kingdom forever, the whole world will be shot through with the presence of God, where there will be no escaping it. Now see, that's important to understand, because for those of us who love God, that'll be a glorious thing. But that's actually why there is a such thing as a hell. It's not easy to talk about. But it's a necessity. See, we get caught up in, well, why would a loving God send people to hell? But that's not the way it works. Hell is just a place that God has provided for those who don't want his presence. The reason it's so terrible is because it's the absence of all good. See, people don't understand now, even the people that don't know God, they're still living off of his goodness. Because right now, God's made a world in which darkness and light, they intermingle together. We have both darkness and light. We have beauty and ugliness. We have goodness and suffering, right? And so there's coming a time when, if God's going to put an end to all suffering, then he's got to take all the darkness and he's got to get rid of it. There's coming a time, like we were talking about here, where light is going to be shot through every aspect of creation. And in that day, there will be no hiding from God. But see, Jesus talks about condemnation. He says he didn't come to condemn. It's not his idea. He doesn't intend to condemn anybody. John 3:16, for God so loved the world. Y'all know it. John 3:17 says, for God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. But then he goes on in a couple of verses and he says, but this is the condemnation, that the light had come into the world, but men loved darkness more than light, because their deeds were evil. One of the most often images used of hell is outer darkness. Darkness, hell, outer darkness is for anyone who doesn't want the light. But God is no longer going to put up with this halfway stuff, or mixed light and darkness. It's coming a day where it's either all light or all darkness. And there will be people who still love darkness more than light. And hell will be, honestly, God's best for them. Because it would be miserable, far more miserable, to stand in the presence of God being opposed to him. I can't even look a strong-willed person in the eyes that I'm opposed to. I couldn't imagine looking God dead in the face for eternity and being opposed to him. In fact, we see that in Revelation. People saying they were crying for the rocks to fall on them, to hide them from the face of him who sat on the throne. You know, I don't make any speculation about how filled hell is going to be or who's going to be there. That's God's business, and thankfully that is God's business. He is far more loving and better and more wise and more understanding than I will ever be, so I'll leave that to him. But just understand that hell is the provision God makes for anybody that doesn't want him. But enough about that. The glory is coming. For those of us who love and follow Jesus, we are being led into this glorious existence that is far beyond anything that we could ever imagine. That God has held out this goodness to us. And what our lives are right here and right now, in the meantime, as we say, while the suffering's still going all around us, we just live in the light. 1 John tells us that. Just live in the light as he is in the light. And so we look at the world through this vision of the glory of God. See, right now, the whole earth is not full of the glory of God, but there is a place where the glory of God shines. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 3, towards the end of 3, towards the beginning of 4, he says that we have the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. The way we live that Isaiah 11 life now, or that Revelation 21 life now, is by looking at Jesus. It's by following Jesus, turning our eyes on him. That's where we find the life. That is the life that God calls us to right here and right now. And Jesus said, if you follow the light, you will become children of light. And as we become children of light, that just means that our nature is that of the light. And we, like Jesus, have the light of life. And we can shine that light into all the dark corners of this earth where we find ourselves. That our lives are meant to be, as we follow Jesus, that we become more and more glorious as we go. As Paul says, outwardly we're wasting away, but inwardly we're being renewed day by day as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. The things that are unseen are primarily Jesus and his kingdom, the glory of God that's all around us, but that's hidden. Now, next week, we're going to talk about taking our place in God's story. And we're going to begin dealing from here through Easter. We're going to begin dealing with the specifics of how we do that. How do we live in such a way that we are looking at the light, seeing the world through the light, and becoming children of light? I want you to pray with me. Dearest Father, we are so grateful for your presence with us. Thank you for the incredible love and light that you have given us. Enough that we can see that all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And in fact, they are well now, that this world is a perfectly safe place to be in your presence, because we are connected with you in such a way that no suffering and not even death can separate us from your love. So we pray that you make this a reality for us. Give us hope, fill us with faith, give us eyes to see and ears to hear, so that we can follow the light and become children of light and shine your light to everyone around us, that they would see it and give glory to you. We're grateful, Lord, that you have called us into this. And we ask you for all this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. God bless. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that lesson filled you with hope for the life that God has in store for us. I'm so grateful that you've joined us. I'm grateful that I don't take for granted every week that you guys give me your time to listen to these messages. And I really hope they're doing good for you. If you want to connect, you can go over and sign up on the pursuitoflove.org, and you can reach out. If you already have connected, please, if you've got any questions or comments or any way we can help, just reach out, because that's what we're here for. If you haven't done so already, we'd love for you to subscribe or follow or like the podcast wherever you're finding it. So hope to see you again next week, but it's my prayer for you that each day of this coming week that you will live as a disciple of Jesus Christ. God bless.